Hello, if you've been following along for this entire APA series, then congratulations, you've made it to the final lesson on APA style. In this video, I'll be talking about in-text citations. So when you're writing a paper, it's not enough to list all of your sources in the references at the end. You also need to let your reader know within the paper when you took information from where. So if you took a word-for-word quote from one of your sources and you put that in your paper, that sentence is going to need to include an in-text citation. And if you paraphrased something from a source and put it in your own words, that sentence is also going to need to include an in-text citation for that source. It's important to make sure that all quotes and all paraphrases are cited within the text. Imagine that you are a singer and you choose to cover somebody else's song. In the liner notes, you're going to have to give credit to the original writer or writers of that song. And if your song makes any money, they're going to get a cut of that, right? So that's like quoting. You're taking something exactly as it was and reproducing it, and you've got to give credit to the original. Now, let's say that you are singing a song and you've recorded it, and it is not a cover, but it does use a sample from another song. Even though it sounds different, it still needs to give credit to the original songwriters, and it still needs to pay them a cut if you make any money off of that song. So that's like you're paraphrasing. You've changed it up, it sounds different, but you're still using something that you got from somewhere else, so you still have to give credit to those original writers. All right, now that we know why it's important to include in-text citations, let's take a look at how to format those citations for both quotes and for paraphrases, because those two look a little bit different. Let's start by looking at a few examples of how to do in-text citations for word-for-word quotes. First example, for those recently diagnosed with a mental disorder who also contracted COVID-19, the death rate was 8.5%, far above the 4.7% death rate in COVID-19 patients in the study with no mental disorder. So obviously, since it's word for word, we've got to make sure to put the entire thing in quotation marks. But once you close your quote, you've got to open a parentheses and insert your in-text citation. What elements do we include here? We start with the author's last name. Notice we only have the last name. In the references, we would also have the first initial, the middle initial, but in the in-text citation, it's last name only. So here we have Volkow, then comma, space, and then you put the year, 2020. You only ever need the year in your in-text citation. You're never going to need month or specific date. Another comma, and then space, and now you have to put the page number or the paragraph number. If it's a journal article, it's going to have page numbers, so you're going to put P dot and the number. But if it's a website article, it may or may not have page numbers, and if it does not have page numbers, you're going to use the paragraph number, which means that you literally have to count how many paragraphs so that you know which paragraph you took it from. And the abbreviation for paragraph is PARA dot, and then you would put the number. Then you close your parentheses and you add your period. Now notice that the period goes at the end of the citation. It does not go before the citation, because the citation is basically a part of your sentence. Now let's look at a different way of citing this quote, because you might introduce the author within the sentence instead of putting the entire citation at the end. Volkow, 2020, describes the mental health and COVID connection as follows. And then I start my quote. For those recently diagnosed with a mental disorder who also contracted COVID-19, the death rate was 8.5%, far above the 4.7% death rate in COVID-19 patients in the study with no mental disorder. And now that paragraph number I put at the end. So because I introduced the author's name within my sentence, I already wrote Volkow, I have to make sure to put the year right after it in parentheses. But the page number or the paragraph number, that's always going to go at the end. And again, the period goes on the outside. Now, something to note here as well is that If you have a page number, always use the page number, P dot. But if you don't, that's when you go with paragraph number. Moving on to example number 2. Quote, bipolar disorder is typically diagnosed during late adolescence, teen years, or early adulthood. Occasionally, bipolar symptoms can appear in children. So same deal, I close my quote, I open my parentheses, and I insert my in-text citation. Now in the case of this source, I did not have an author. Just as you do for your references, when you don't have an author, you include the name of the organization or institution responsible for that information as your author. So I'm going to do the same thing in my in-text citation. My author for this will be National Institute of Mental Health, since I did not have an author, comma, and this also did not have a date. So I'm going to put N.D. for no date instead of the year, just as I would in my references page, comma, space, and this also had no page numbers. So once again, I'm going to go with paragraph number, PARA.7, close my parentheses, and add my period. Now, if I introduced the author, in this case, the name of the organization, within my sentence, it might look like this. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, parentheses ND, quote, bipolar disorder is typically diagnosed during late adolescence, teen years, or early adulthood. Occasionally, bipolar symptoms can appear in children. Close my quote, and since I already included the author, National Institute of Mental Health, and the date, in this case, no date, within my sentence, I don't have to do that again at the end, but the one thing that is missing and that I need to add is that paragraph number. Example number 3. This is a quote from a scholarly journal article. The search for genes influencing bipolar disorder has been complicated by a paucity of animal models, limited understanding of pathogenesis, and the genetic and phenotypic complexity of the syndrome. So I close out my quote, once again, open my parentheses, insert my citation. In this case, I have 2 authors, so I'm going to put both last names, again, last names only, Barnett and Smoller. And notice that I use the ampersand symbol for the word and. Then comma, space, my year, 2009, comma, space. This did have page numbers, so I'm doing P dot, and then 331, close my parentheses, period. What if I introduce these authors as part of my sentence? It might look like this. Barnett and Smoller, 2009, explain that, and now I start my quote, the search for genes influencing bipolar disorder has been complicated by a paucity of animal models, limited understanding of pathogenesis, and the genetic and phenotypic complexity of the syndrome. Once again, I already included the authors and the year as part of my sentence. The only thing still missing is the page number. So include that in parentheses at the very end, and then finish off with my period. Another tiny thing to note here is that while I use an ampersand symbol when I put the 2 authors inside a parentheses at the end, if I'm putting the 2 authors as part of my sentence, then I'm going to actually spell out and instead of using the symbol. Final example for quotes, and this is also from a scholarly journal article. The results of the present day study suggest that bipolar disorder is being overdiagnosed. Now, in the case of this article, I had 4 authors. And what happens when you have more than 2 authors is that you don't actually have to list them all in your in-text citation. If you have 3 or more authors, you only write the last name of the first author that they list, and then you write the little phrase et al., which means and others in Latin. So here you're basically saying Zimmerman and those other people. The et al. Has a little period after the all, and then everything else is going to be the same, comma, space, year, comma, space, page number, or if there's no page number, paragraph number, close your parentheses, period. Now, if I were to introduce the author or authors within the sentence, it would look like this. The study conducted by Zimmerman et al., 2008, suggests that bipolar disorder is being overdiagnosed, page 938. So again, my author or authors within the sentence means that I need to put the year right after them in parentheses, but the page or paragraph number will still go at the end. And I use the et al. Construction here just in the same way as I did it if I had put everything in a parentheses at the end. Now, one little thing I did here that I should note is notice the word suggest, I added an S to it. So now it says suggests. That's because in the original quote, it didn't say suggests, it said suggests, but the word suggest wouldn't work grammatically because of the way I introduced the quote. I can't say the study suggests. I have to say the study suggests. So I went ahead and added the S so that it makes sense grammatically, but I put little brackets around the S, and that lets my reader know that the original quote did not have that S in there. You can use brackets for little circumstances like that when you have to add in things to make it work grammatically, but those little things were not in the original quote. Another little trick, and this happens pretty often, is if you don't need the entire quote, if you just need a part of it, and maybe there's a part of the sentence in the middle that you can take out, or a part at the end that you want to remove, then go ahead and take it out, but just add a little ellipsis, the 3 little dots, and that will inform your reader that there was something in there that you actually took out of the original quote. Now, what if we are paraphrasing information from our sources instead of quoting it? So we're putting it in our own words instead of taking it word for word. Well, if you already know how to do your in-text citations for quotes, for paraphrases, it's actually easier because we do still need to cite. However, we don't need to include as many elements in the in-text citation for a paraphrase as we do for a quote. You're still going to have to say the author and the year, but you no longer need to include the page or paragraph number. So let's take a look at the same quote examples that we had before and create paraphrases for them so that we can compare what the in-text citation looks like for the quote version versus for the paraphrase version. Our first example. For those recently diagnosed with a mental disorder who also contracted COVID-19, the death rate was 8.5%, far above the 4.7% death rate in COVID-19 patients in the study with no mental disorder. In that one, we had the 3 elements, Volkow, 2020, and paragraph 3. We had decided to put them all at the end. So if we were to paraphrase this to something that sounds like this, the death rate from COVID-19 from mental health patients was 3.8% higher than for those who did not have a known mental health condition. That's in our own words. We still have to cite it, but now all we need is Volkow, 2020. We only need the author and the year. Of course, we're still going to put our period after our citation instead of before. Let's take a look at our second example. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, ND, bipolar disorder is typically diagnosed during late adolescence, teen years, or early adulthood. Occasionally, bipolar symptoms can appear in children. So starting from the words bipolar disorder, all of this was word for word. We put the author and the year, which in this case we didn't have, so we used ND, in the sentence so that we put the paragraph number at the end. But what if I were to paraphrase this instead of quote it? According to the National Institute of Mental Health, ND, bipolar disorder is much more likely to be diagnosed in teenagers and young adults than in children. Now all I need is author and year. My author is the name of the institution in this case, and I don't have a year, so I did ND. Both of those things are already in my sentence, so I don't have to put them at the end of my sentence as well. Let's look at our third example. The search for genes influencing bipolar disorder has been complicated by a paucity of animal models, limited understanding of pathogenesis, and the genetic and phenotypic complexity of the syndrome. That was word for word. It had 2 authors. We put both in the parentheses, the year, and the page number. What if I were to paraphrase this and put the authors and the year at the end? Because scientists understand so little about the disease development or genetics of bipolar disorder, identifying the precise genes responsible for the mental illness has proven difficult. Same deal with the authors. The little ampersand symbol goes in between the 2, comma, year, period at the end, but no page number this time. And let's look at our last example. The study conducted by Zimmerman et al., 2008, quote, suggests that bipolar disorder is being overdiagnosed. Then we put our page number at the end because we had author with the et al. And year already in our sentence. But now I'm going to paraphrase instead of quote that little section. The study conducted by Zimmerman et al., 2008, highlights the issue of overdiagnosing bipolar disorder. Okay, I already had the author with the et al. And the 2008 within my sentence. That's author, that's year. I don't need page or paragraph number for a paraphrase, so I'm done. Overall, you can think of your in-text citations as a kind of shorthand for your references. Although you do not have all of the information about the source in the in-text citation, the reader does get enough information to know how to find the rest of it in your references page. And it also lets the reader know which bit of information came from which source. So that's it. That's all of APA. Good luck with it, and you're done with APA. So go have a party, eat a cookie, I don't know, do something fun.